So everybody, and we're going to get going here in just a couple of minutes. But Matt Scafidi is joining us. Matt's one of our preferred attorneys. We work with him a lot. Him and his team are amazing. And one of the things that I wanted to go over today was the new home inspection regulations that are coming into play next week. And I figured for that part of the conversation, which will likely be the first 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes. I figure we would have Matt on the call so that he can answer from a legal perspective, because there is some gray area, and he and I were talking about it earlier. I think there's going to be some figuring out how this whole thing plays out. Even with have people seen this like one pager that came out from the Massachusetts Association of Realtors, or it might be Greater Boston Association of Realtors. Yeah. But have people seen this, read through this yet?
Seen it.
Um,
Haven't gone through the details.
yeah, and it's hard too sometimes when we look at these things. I'm going through the stuff too early because then stuff changes last minute. But it looks like this is going to go in effect next week after a couple of delays. Um, and we should know about it. And that's the purpose of sort of the front half of this call today. Is when Matt and I were talking about it, we were looking at it from the perspective of um, like how can we gain a competitive advantage legally with home inspections. Right now, obviously, we have to include the home inspection regardless, but right in there's a couple of things that depending on your client's risk tolerance, we can put language in there that will be more beneficial to the seller than perhaps a full home inspection with no contingencies in there. And so right off the bat, the timeline is one of those things. There's also it does state in here that we can have a portion of the deposit or the deposit listed as non-refundable if the buyer decides to back out. And so think about it from this perspective. We always, we've been working through home inspection language for years. How can we propose um, propose this stuff to benefit our client over the competition? Um, so yeah, I wanted to go into that. Does anybody, and I'll give a couple of thoughts, and then I'd love to hear everybody else's thoughts, or if anybody else has any particular ideas on how we can sort of capitalize on this versus the people who aren't paying attention to it. So the first thing for me is the timeline. So Matt, maybe you can jump in and talk to us about just as far as the timeline is concerned. I know that the regulations state that the timeline can't reasonably hold on, I'm looking at such as unreasonably restricting scheduling or denying the buyers the option to back out based on the inspection results. Um, right, we can't render the home inspection meaningless, but what is reasonable? And again, there's no definitive timeline. Reasonable is one of those sort of gray areas, and I do understand that, Matt. But I'm wondering, based on your knowledge of this, like as far as timelines are concerned, what do you see out there as being sort of like very reasonable, safe, and what's sort of pushing the boundary? Matt, I can't hear you. I don't know if anybody else can.
Yes, he's unmuted.
Yeah, you're unmuted. I just can't. Yeah. He'll call into it. Um, the second thing that I'm going to talk about is sort of a non-refundable deposit. So if we look at multiple offer situation where a seller gets a standard home inspection contingency with 10 days to 14 days, and then on the and then you get one that has 7 days or 5 days, and the buyer will forego a $5,000 deposit if they back out due to the home inspection. Now, is that reasonable? I don't know. And that's what we're going to rely on sort of Matt to just kick us off. Hold on, I'm putting his phone in.
All right, how about now?
Yeah, that's working.
All right, so look, I think the statute is tricky. It uses the word unreasonable, not reasonable. And so I think what they consider we have no idea, right? But I think what an unreasonable home inspection deadline might be, you got 24 hours to do the home inspection and 2 days to sign the PNS, or maybe it's 3 days to get the inspection done and to sign the PNS, because the statute specifically says unreasonably limiting the buyer's ability to schedule, receive, and review the home inspection. So what's reasonable? I don't know. Maybe 5 days becomes the standard. You can't rush a PNS down people's throats anymore because they've got the ability to do this home inspection now. So I think what they're worried about is the sort of 2 day deadline or the 3 day deadline. I think home inspectors are going to be trickier to nail down. And so
We lost you, Matt.
Yeah, you're muted on there.
how about now?
There you
So
go.
I think in the short term, what they're worried about is these quick ones, and I don't know that we'll figure out what the norm is going forward, whether it's a minimum of 5 days or something. Until somebody sues, until somebody gets sued, I don't think we're going to be able to define what they mean by reasonable or unreasonable in this statute.
Yeah, and so from the perspective, because obviously we as buyers agents are going to be running up what we believe is reasonable, and then, but from likewise from the seller side, if we get something that says, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we're presenting an offer and we've got 48 hours in there for the home inspection contingency, we've got something setting up for tomorrow, is it also our obligation on the listing side to not accept an offer that might be in that gray area of what's reasonable?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you accept, look, if you have two offers that are very, very similar in many ways, but you accept one of them that has a much faster PNS deadline and inspection deadline, I think it's a wink and a nod between the realtors that we're not doing a home inspection. We're going to speed this thing up. So you as the listing agent have some exposure there, because that's it's a little bit trying to skirt the system a little bit. I think you have to put some sort of reasonable deadline in there for the home inspection to occur. Once your offer is accepted, you can tell the seller side that you're not going forward with the inspection. But I don't think you as a listing agent should be considering offers that have a super fast timeline on those dates.
So if we're looking at what's reasonable and unreasonable, a 5 day home inspection contingency period might be that middle ground where it's certainly reasonable enough time to get somebody in there, but fast enough that we turn this around again. Because, when we're dealing with these home inspections, and for the most part, I mean, and let me ask everybody here, I mean, it's pretty common now that we're getting home inspections on every property. I mean, we haven't had a whole lot of waived inspections over the last 6 to 8 months. Has anybody seen a lot of waived home inspections recently?
No.
No, I've still seen inspections with caps on them though, or minimums, right? So $10,000 waived, those kind of things. I personally, if I put in an offer, I shorten the time period from 10 days, down to 5 or 7, depending on what the home inspectors can do. So I think that's kind of reasonable anyways. So,
and so the cap on it might be something too. And Matt, I'm interested to hear what you have to say, but part of that provision clearly states that that we can't unreasonably restrict scheduling or deny a buyer's buyers the option to back out based on the inspection results. And so if we have a cap on how much, I guess that would restrict the buyer from backing out. If we said, hey, listen, in an extreme example, buyer will cover up to $25,000 worth of repairs on the property. That does, in certain sense, restrict the ability of the buyer. If there's $22,000 worth of inspection findings, that essentially restricts their ability to back out. Matt, would you agree with that? That putting a cap on it is risky at this point?
I think. Well, so what happened in the original bill that was passed? There were a couple things in the original bill. One is that they put a 10-day period in there that every buyer would have the right to. That's gone. Mar, Greb, everybody freaked out about that. That's gone from the statute. The other thing that they intimated was that they weren't going to allow these caps, these inspection dollar figures. They are going to accept them, and they've built it right into the form. Now, you tell me if Mar's put out the form yet. I don't think they put out the form yet, even though we're 6 days away now. Mar and Greb have not put out the new offer form yet, but they showed us what it is on their website. So they showed us what it's going to look like. It's going to include a space there where you can put a dollar figure in. So that will not, I mean, the statute says you can't render a home inspection meaningless. And the second part of it is prohibiting the buyer. You may agree to limit a buyer's choice not to proceed if the estimated aggregate cost of repairs, blah, blah, blah. So they're talking about it right in the statute. They are okay with putting a dollar figure into the offer.
Mhm.
Okay. But do you think that there's any, right, so the house costs $500,000. I mean, obviously, putting a $500,000 cap on it,
That's
doesn't, renders it effectively meaningless, right?
That's right. So they're talking about frustrating the purpose of this statute, right? If it's a $300,000 condo in Attleboro, your threshold better be lower than a $3 million single family home somewhere. Like you better keep an eye on that dollar figure. Again, what's reasonable, what's unreasonable, I don't know, but I think we've been skirting the line on that for many years. Anyway. Did I lose you guys? No, somebody's just trying to beat me. I think we've been skirting the line on that for years anyway, where we put in a $20,000 limit. Any home inspector can find $20,000 worth of repairs if we need them to, right? But
Right.
Exactly. You can find
and the
those-
way that I always described it to clients is that it's more the intent behind it versus the actual language, because any buyer or inspector is going to be able to find what they want to get their client out. But what they're doing is they're setting proper expectations about what they want. And again, it's, proper expectations can go right out the window with an emotional buyer or seller. But again, it's more the intent behind it than the actual legality of it or the enforceability of it. Like, who's to say what $5,000 or $10,000 is, right?
yeah.
And so it does. I think if we can put that in, I think that's another sort of layer of, apples to apples. If you're looking at these two offers that are virtually identical, and one has a 5-day versus a 10-day, one has a $10,000 cap versus no cap, and again, the third thing is, the non-refundability of the deposit. So Matt, do you have any sense on what's reasonable as far as a, non-refundable deposit if the buyer backs out as a result of the home inspection?
No, they're doing a good job of avoiding that issue. So I think they're perfectly fine letting buyers back out if the home inspection is not satisfactory to them. And so they're giving a lot of the power to the buyer there. Can a seller withhold their full $1,000 or whatever if they back out of the transaction? I think so. Yep. If you build that into the offer. Yep.
Right. And then again, it becomes pushing the boundaries a little bit, where it's like, okay, well, if we're putting a $2,500 or $5,000 initial deposit down, and we're sort of putting in all these regulations, right? I think what this is going to be a little bit of a, again, figuring this out, because the state doesn't want to put specifics on it. So they're going to let all of us sort of be the guinea pigs until the lawyers take over and determine what, how ambiguous this language is. So, each and every one of you guys is going to have to determine, I think, how sort of safe you want to play it or how aggressive you want to play it based on, your knowledge and understanding of these terms and conditions. But again, these are things that you need to have the conversation with your clients about. Certainly on the seller side, you want to just sort of have that red flag up about, an awareness of whether or not that, and it all goes back to that language that unreasonably restricts the buyer's ability to, complete the home inspection or back out of the contract. But if you're within sort of that standard, then what's pushing the boundary? And I think we're going to find that out over time. But for right now, again, like as Matt said, 5 days for the home inspection timeline, I think is right at that sort of reasonable rate. Non-refundability of deposit, I think it's easy to say $1,000, probably 2,500. But if you throw down a $50,000 deposit and say it's non-refundable, again, that's getting really that's sort of making the home inspection obsolete. And so you just have to look at what's reasonable in these circumstances. And we're going to find out sort of what becomes standard. Once one trend starts taking shape, right? Once they started waiving home inspections, once they started shortening, because again, at the beginning of my career, it was like 14 days for a home inspection. And there was nobody that was doing under that. It was like standard 2 weeks for home inspection and P&S. And I know we crushed the soul of Matt and all the other attorneys when everybody was like, okay, 5 days for P&S, and we don't tell them anything for 3 of those days. And then he's like, so you need a P&S negotiated in the next 12 minutes. Okay, thanks, guys. Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to figure out all these regulations, but it's important to understand them because we need to be able to explain this stuff to our buyers and our sellers to not only protect us and our clients, specifically the sellers, but also what can we do as far as pushing the boundary to give our clients a competitive advantage against agents that perhaps don't know as much and aren't doing that. So
Ben, if I can just chime in on one thing. I mean, and I think an interesting discussion is pre-inspections. So as a listing agent, there's obviously, I heard somebody say that they were going to have a lot of their sellers now conduct inspections. And as long as the thing doesn't reveal anything major, they would be providing that to a lot of buyers up front to speed the process up. So they will provide that, maybe even put it in MLS, or have that as if you submit an offer, you get a copy of the inspection that seller's done. A lot of risk there, a lot of crazy reasons why you would do that or not do that. The other thing is, are we going to see an increase in buyer pre-inspections? Are sellers going to be okay with a bunch of buyers doing pre-inspections? Does that speed things up here? I think that in that case, you put in a 5 or 7 day period of time to conduct your inspection in your home and your P&S, but the seller and the listing agent already know that you conducted a pre-inspection. So the game's already been rigged a little bit because they know you're moving forward with the deal. You conducted your inspection, you've submitted an offer with a 7-day, 10-day time period, but the truth is you're ready to sign pretty quickly. So I'm curious about pre-inspections, what this might do.
So are you saying that potentially providing a pre-inspection report to a buyer would allow a seller to accept an offer without that home inspection period, or just sort of give everybody more knowledge so the likelihood that the sale continues to go through even with the inspection period in there is more likely?
That's right, the latter. The buyer in that case that does the pre-inspection still has to have this in their offer. They still have to have the paragraph that says, pursuant to 760 CMR, I have the right to a home inspection. But everybody already knows they've already done a home inspection, right? So that might be a competitive advantage you give some of your buyers, is by saying, look, You know, it's going to cost you $700, but this will guarantee we're getting pushed to the front of the line if we do a pre-inspection. And so that might be an interesting play.
So, so whether the buyer or the seller does the pre-inspection, it still requires us to allow for the home inspection language in the purchase and sales, or in the offer. But the likelihood that that kind of continues without issue is increased. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. Yep. Yep.
Um,
Greg got a question?
Matt, what exposure does a listing agent have representing a home inspector, and then the buyer can contest that and say, well, wait a minute, this, you know, you're representing the home inspection, which I agree is a good practice, but it's now going to be used against us? Or do you think there's some liability in that, you know, on the day the property was inspected, there was no water in the basement. Buyer comes back for the final walkthrough, there's water in the basement, and they're going to say, well, your home inspector did a poor job. You know, what do you think? There's
Hang on, Greg, you're saying in the scenario where the seller performs the inspection and provides it to the buyers. I'm not even advising you to do that. I'm just saying I listen to some realtors talk about doing that they often do occasionally advise their sellers to conduct a home inspection, maybe get out ahead of some major issues that might need to be done for any buyer that comes to the table. Now they're talking about providing that to any prospective buyers. I don't know that that's smart or really stupid or somewhere in between. It's risky. It sounds risky to me. But you're identifying one of the many issues that could come up from it. I mean, look, if you're a buyer and you're relying on the seller's home inspection, you're already kind of making a little bit of a roll in the dice a little bit, right? I mean,
well, and also they still have, like, they still will have the opportunity to perform and conduct their own home inspection. So even if a seller does prepare one, that doesn't necessarily mean, it just doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have the option.
Regardless of the strategy, though, is there any exposure to liability to us? You said it could be very smart or very dumb. Even if you just put it out there and they miss something, is there any exposure or liability to me if I put it out there and say, use this disclaimer, we're not responsible for this information, but use it at your discretion. We're trying to help you, right? You still have your time period. Is there any exposure to us if we put that inspection out there? Because I have done that in the past, and some people like it. I don't know if it's a good solution in this scenario now because it's changed. But do you think there's any liability for the results of the home inspection? Because I don't like to represent somebody else's work. So do you think
I feel like if that ever becomes a lawsuit where the third or fourth person named in the lawsuit is Greg Martin because it was your home inspector and you told me to you know, you've recommended, I don't think you have any exposure there. I think your case gets thrown out immediately. I don't think you have any exposure there. The home inspector is the licensed professional. The home inspector is the one that made you sign a list of disclosures and conditions and everything. You as the listing agent are shielded, especially if you're doing additional, making additional representations that this is not your home inspection. You're not making any statements in the thing. And so I don't think you have exposure there.
Okay.
Yeah, and as far as pre-home inspections, guys, I think for the value of having the seller be aware of how one individual inspector will look at it, I think again could potentially, provide some insight that the seller can address those issues or make disclosures so that the process goes smoother. So there could potentially be some value in that. What I typically will tell my clients though is that, this is an individual inspector's opinion and what they see. I see the home inspectors sort of make a big deal or a small deal about a lot of different things. And so just because you get one home inspection report doesn't mean that another home inspector isn't going to see things differently, right? So you're spending money on that. The other thing too is that in my experience, even if you do that, I wouldn't share it. If the seller decides to do that, I would never share it with the buyer. Reading a home inspection report, guys, without context is scary, right? Like you go through a home inspection report, a home inspection with an inspector, and you see all the things, over the course of 3 hours. It's like, yeah, this is going on and this is going on, but it's sort of customary. This is out of code, but it's supposed to be out of code because it was built in the 1970s, right? But on that home inspection report, you're just hit within 5 minutes of reading it of every single line item that's wrong with the house, and that can be incredibly overwhelming. So again, for the purposes of making the seller aware of any potential bigger issues, potentially if you think that the house needs it. Otherwise, I've often told my clients to just put the $700, $800, $900 in their pocket and wait for the home inspector to come through on the buyer side and apply that money towards any issues that come up.
And if I can add to that, especially because if it's a multiple offer situation and you don't know for sure who's coming in with offers that they're waiving inspection or not, doing the inspection preemptively and then having an inspection done anyway, it could be a waste of that money.
Yeah, and again, with certain properties, where there might be a lot of unknown issues, that again, perhaps. But again, that type of property is going to attract a certain type of buyer that's going to have a higher risk tolerance for repairs and updates. And, that's going to be priced accordingly. So again, use your judgment. But again, my personal opinion is that sharing home inspection reports without context to buyers, has much more downside than upside.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, so we've talked about sort of the timeline and go ahead, Don.
Can I ask 2 questions? Because I have 2 buyers down in North Carolina right now, I was made aware that both of those buyers have a $5,000 risk tolerance when they put in an offer. It's subject to be completely lost if they back out for any reason. And the home inspection, can be, the agent can be held responsible for not making the house available enough to recognize problems, which to me, that's just ridiculous because we do what we can to stage a house for sale, not to remove items from certain locations so that the house is more readily inspectable. I'm just curious, Matt, if any of these things now become more of a responsibility, especially from what I read, the home inspection can only be a licensed home inspector now, and you can't bring in extra services such as an electrician or a plumber to do additional inspections. Is that right?
I don't think that's right. I don't think the statute covers that. I think that what the offer form is going to state is that the statute says that you have the right, every buyer has the right to a home inspection and has to be by a licensed home inspector. But once your offer is accepted, then the parties can do whatever they want. So if you say, actually, we're not really going to, we'll do a for informational purposes only with my uncle because he's really handy. We just want to bring in our electrician because we're worried about this one matter. So you can do all that stuff. They're all concerned about the offer stage and what the buyer has the right to do, blindly going into any transaction with the seller.
Gotcha.
Don brought up the same point that I've been curious about, which is sometimes you can go into a house and 95% of it looks good and you really just want to get a person an electrician is a great example. So what is it going to cost to upgrade this panel? So now you have a licensed, insured estimate of the work. And if you are going to negotiate, if there's room to do it, at least you have a real number, not just a made up number. So does that constitute an inspection? If you can save the $700 for a general home inspection, that's not going to give you anything that you don't already see, and then just bring in the expert, and maybe they charge you for a quote, or maybe they do the quote for free, but now you have really all the information you want. Does that count?
Yeah, right. The buyer doesn't have to do the home inspection. They don't have to do anything. You don't have to
have the window of time.
Yeah, so you just can't limit the buyer's ability to do it, but that doesn't obligate the buyer to do anything. So if your buyer says, hey, listen, I don't want to do a home inspection, but I want to get an electrician in, as long as the seller's okay with that. But yeah, actually, Matt, so that brings it up. Can the seller restrict contractors versus you can't restrict a home inspection to be done, but could you restrict a contractor from coming in? I don't know why
Yeah.
you would, but
You definitely can. You definitely can. Absolutely. Yep.
so
Yeah.
at that point,
But by the way, you could probably put that in your offer.
yeah,
So the offer says I have the right to conduct an inspection in the next 7 days. And I also wish to bring an electrical contractor in to give me a quote on the new panel, within the next 7 days. I mean, you could put that right in your offer and just be frank with the seller side about what you're hoping to do.
I like it. We can do that. We just have to be upfront about it.
Yeah.
anybody else have any questions from that?
Just thank you for having this conversation, because the dialogue is helpful when you kind of role play it through with other people that are seeing it and have experience with it. It is going to be awkward for a little bit, but at least feel prepared for it.
My contention is that this will cause us some headaches and some conversations and some nightmares till the spring market. Like, I think we have like 6 months, we'll figure it out, and then it'll become the new normal for us and we'll be fine. And so the same thing as TRID, the same thing as the broker commission laws, I think it'll all just take some time for the dust to settle, and then it'll be the new normal for us.
Yeah. And again, we're going into a much more normal market here over the course of the next couple of years anyway. So this,
Not everybody on this call, knock on some wood right now after he said that, for crying out loud. Good God.
but if that's the case and we start seeing, inventory levels increasing and the number of home sales increasing, I mean, again, the set of circumstances that created 2011 and the waiving of home inspections and the buyers assuming all of the risk during the transaction, that was such a unique sort of period of time that I don't even know that, again, if this was the middle of 2011 sorry, 21, 22, there was one of those years we sold 76 houses and I think we had 3 home inspections out of all of them. And so it's like, we're back to a situation where 95% of places have home inspections anyway. And if this is the norm, then again, it just goes back to this idea of how can we use the timeline, tighten up the timeline to what is reasonable, right? Look at a non-refundable initial escrow deposit. If your client really doesn't want a home inspection, right, we can't condition it on it, but we can make the terms as seller friendly as the law will allow. And I love that, the state doesn't want to define those things. They want us to figure it out through lawsuits, but that's ultimately what's going to happen here. So again, use reason and discernment to determine what these things are. And you're going to start to, again, if everybody's waiving a $5,000 or making a $5,000 non-refundable deposit, you're seeing it across the board on 20, 30, 50 homes, right? Like that's going to start to say, hey, listen, that's what's reasonable because that's what everybody is doing. But if you're throwing a $20,000 non-refundable deposit, nobody ever is doing that, then that might be towing the line. So again, timeline, non-refundability of initial deposit, an aggregate amount of $5,000 or $10,000 where the buyer is assuming those things, right? That doesn't unreasonably restrict them from doing it and or backing out, but it does make it more seller friendly, right? It shifts the risk profile drastically from one side to the other. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do and accomplish, especially if your clients, and this is only if your clients are aware and comfortable with it. And that ultimately is going to end up boiling down to how well we can describe this without overwhelming our clients, right? So it is incumbent upon us. It's easy if we're all submitting offers, 2 or 3 offers a week for the next 6 weeks. It's going to be really easy for us to develop that skill of having this home inspection conversation. But if you're submitting an offer a month, you might need to practice this conversation with one another, right? We talk a lot about role play and getting good with scripts and dialogues and, being able to efficiently and effectively communicate what we're trying to without confusing and overwhelming. I seem to be exceptionally good with communication when it comes to details, with the exception of my wife, in which case she just like blank stares me and I'm done, right? But you have to get really good at communicating this stuff to people. So telling them what the options are, what their risks are, making it more seller friendly, guys, is going to increase their risk. They could potentially lose a deposit. They have to set up a home inspection quickly, right? They might have to cover repairs and updates that they don't want to. So there is risk there. That's why it's becoming more seller friendly, is because the buyer is assuming that risk. Now they used to be able to assume all of it. Now they can assume a portion of it. So if your clients are comfortable with it, it can give them a competitive advantage over the rest of the buyers in a competitive offer situation.
Hey guys, I'm sorry to cut you. I gotta run. I gotta run to my next one is super early right now, so I've got some folks here I gotta run to.
Yeah,
But
no,
I'm a
Matt,
bit.
thank you for your time.
Thanks
I'm
for
gonna drop
coming.
all your info in the chat. So if anybody
Yeah.
needs a really good attorney, Matt's the man.
Anytime. Let me know what you guys need. Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Thanks,
Matt.
Matt.
Bye.
Thanks, buddy.